Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a vote to remove DEI from Duval Public Schools draws pushback. We talk to public school advocates about what abandoning language of inclusion and equity could mean for administrators and students. Later in the program, a free concert series at Cathedral Basilica brings culture and chamber music to the ancient city for the 19th season. But first, a consequential vote could eliminate the school district's longstanding commitments to diverse, representative, and non-discriminatory policies. Here to talk about it is Yasmina White, Duval County Public School parent and public school advocate. Good morning, Yasmina.
Hi, good morning.
We're also joined by Warren Jones, former City Council president and former Duval County School Board chair. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. We're also joined by Janie Joseph Ruiz, a senior manager of Safe and Healthy Schools from Equality, Florida. She's joining us via video. Good morning, Janie.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. Warren, I would like to start with you if I could. First of all, for the current policy, I'm curious if the current kind of language of DEI in school board policy is something you were involved in drafting. And also, I just wonder if you could kind of remind us a little bit about how we got to this point in Duval County when it comes to, including language, DEI language in policy, sort of versus where we came from.
Okay, thank you. No, I was not a part of drafting the language, but I know that historically there have been efforts to make sure, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of our everyday work at the school board. Language speaks to the policy of how we operate to make sure that we include everyone, that every student is not at the same level. So you have to have equity to make sure that you bring those students who are struggling up to the level they need to be. And I think that policy generates from years of efforts to make sure that we include everyone. There's always been pushback. Historically, affirmative action was the thing, and there was a lot of pushback on that. When schools went to integrate, of course, the Duval County School Board pushed to build new schools. They built Raines and Eugene Butler to keep from integrating. So there's always been that pushback, and I think we're at a point today where we see there's a pushback to DEI, the policy of DEI. But I think the reality is that we are a diverse community, and we don't need to shy away from that. And I hate to see the school board or any other entity push back against the efforts to make sure that we include everybody. Because when the message is given by a diverse group, I think it's more acceptable than if this is one-sided. You look at the trials back in the 60s and 70s when it was an all-white jury convicted someone of color. People didn't accept that verdict. But when it's integrated, it's diverse, then the acceptance of whatever verdict is reached is more acceptable. And I think those issues resonate with a lot of people on the school board.
And I'm curious, how Duval in particular compares in terms of, the need for policies like this. I mean, the desegregation of public schools, was basically the law of the nation from 1954. But in Duval County, it took many, many years for a real serious effort to desegregate began. And it was court ordered, in fact.
That's correct.
And really didn't kind of start until a lawsuit was brought in 1971. And so there was, many years where it was still de facto desegregation, and then, years of the court kind of enforcing things like busing, building new schools, and tearing down some schools. So can you just tell me, do you view DEI policy in a different light just because Duval's history is so fraught when it comes to things like integration?
Yeah, I have a different perspective than most people because I grew up in a segregated school system. And so there were some advantages to that because we had teachers who taught issues of race and the impact it had on our lives, but it also told us that we could be whatever we wanted to be. Having now a position where your teachers are prohibited from talking about certain things in the classroom, and if a teacher does that, then they could be suspended or removed from their job. So I think it's important that we understand that we are in a diverse community and we need not shy away from that. We need to promote it as we should. And I think that looking back on those efforts to deny integration uh, says as a community we need to promote it more because we had to go through a lot to get to where we are today. Uh, Lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, pushback after pushback, and here we are today in 2025, where now there's a effort to retreat from that message of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope that the school board does not do that. I know that they're concerned about funding. If you don't uh, change that policy, then will you lose funding? That hasn't happened yet. So why? And unlike other communities, Jacksonville had always has had a large black population, and so unlike other counties in the state of Florida, we need to be promoting that diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I want to ask you, Yasmina, as a parent. I mean, the reason that we're talking about this today is because there was this lengthy discussion about school board policy at a recent workshop, essentially, that the school board had in late May. And now there are a couple of meetings coming up. As a parent of two students, one is about to enter this Duval County Public Schools, one who is in for a number of years now. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about why you personally are involved in this issue, why you're speaking to the school board about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So, being involved in public schools is a passion of mine. Being a graduate of Duval County Public Schools is important to me. And furthering that legacy through my kids is important to me. Our public schools are amazing schools, and I want the district and school board members to know that. We have a majority Republican um, school board supporters, board members, and they are backed by Moms for Liberty. And they do not support DEI. They do not support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want other parents to understand the makeup of our school board and how they impact policy and how they impact what our students are impacted by on a daily basis. I think people don't realize the importance of our school board members. They are just as important as our city council members, our mayor, our governor, our president. And at the federal level, they are being emboldened right now to criminalize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not fair. And to Warren's point, to how we've gotten here and why we've gotten here in the Deep South, it is important that parents realize and understand what is happening on the school level, at the district level, at the school board level, in all areas.
Jeannie, I want to bring you into the conversation. I mean, we should say that the school board is nominally nonpartisan, but we do know that there is a majority of members that are endorsed by or affiliated with Moms for Liberty, which of course has been a chief vocal opponent of DEI, and also behind a number of pushes to ban books from schools or remove books from school shelves. Um, why is this issue of importance to Equality Florida, and what is what is your organization doing on the local level, if anything, to make your voice heard?
Yeah, thank you. So to Yasmina's point, this is why the school board is so important in making critical decisions that will have lasting impacts on the entire community. So our organization, Equality Florida, does civil rights work here in Florida in a variety of ways. My specific area focuses on pushing back on bad policy in K through 12 school districts and supporting school districts to take accountability for ensuring that their kids can have a safe environment to learn in. And so, what we're seeing here throughout Florida is a reaction to both federal and state, just to be transparent, bullying, right? There is, what's interesting is there is no one specific law that one can point to validate what we are seeing happen in some of our school districts. What is taking place is an overcompliance that is rooted in fear. And so this is why, coming back to what I initially said, school board members and who you vote for in your school board member is so important, because this is the difference between a school board that is composed of members that care about its student body when they are put in a situation where they're being bullied by the state or the federal government and it's not rooted in any specific law. That school board would have the decency to stand up and push back and say, we are going to continue to protect and support our kids. And until you can point to one thing that we are doing that's breaking the law, we're going to continue to operate as usual, which is what the Duval School Board should be doing. They should be operating business as usual with the same policies intact that they've had to support their students. Instead, now you have board members like the ones from Moms for Liberty, who are from Moms for Liberty, now are emboldened to do what they've always wanted to do because they are in a political climate that is ripe for them to do it without consequence. Rather, they're in a political climate that encourages it. And so we see this type of overcompliance, overreaction. And so our job now in Equality Florida, Safe and Healthy Schools, is to build confidence. We are doing a whole lot of confidence building. We're watching these school board agendas like a hawk throughout the state and making sure when we see something like this come up that we can respond, we can reach out to board members, we can let them know that what they're doing is not rooted in law, but fear, and that they do not need to be doing this. We can explain to them why. We can also inform the community about what's taking place so that people know that this is happening and they know how they can show up and make their voice heard.
But Janie, I want to ask you because I mean the policies that are being proposed to change, and we have a couple of pages that the people who are watching our live stream will be able to see that kind of show the wholesale strike throughs that are being proposed on some of these DEI policies. But these are being driven, according to the school board, in administration, Trump administration warnings and policies that basically have said schools could lose their federal funds, including grants intended for low income students, if they don't abandon DEI, saying that, in the administration believes that DEI programs violate civil rights law, and that if schools are not compliant with removing what they're calling illegal DEI practices, that they will lose really, important federal funding. So why shouldn't school board members, Janie, be reacting to this and being proactive?
Because this is rooted in the administration's attempt to reinterpret non-discrimination. And they've decided that DEI now constitutes as discrimination when we know that that is not correct. School districts every year apply for Title VI funding, and that's not that funding is based on the commitment that school districts make to making sure that they will not discriminate based on race, sex, gender, age, etc., etc. And so if a school district was signing on to receive Title VI funding and committing to the ideal that they will not discriminate based on these factors, if they were making that commitment year after year, what's different about this year is you have an administration that's come in and decided that, hey, your Title VI non-discrimination funding, DEI could cause you to lose that because you have an administration that believes that DEI now somehow constitutes as discrimination. So what is happening is based on the threats that are coming from this administration based on how it wants to interpret non-discrimination policies and federal funding that is based on non-discrimination. Since the Trump administration has come in and tried to enforce this upon school districts, we have seen several courts stand up and strike down and disagree with what the administration is trying to do. And so that is why we are telling our school districts to hold steady, stand firm, see how these things play out in the courts. Do not make preemptive decisions that will harm your students. This is not the time to cede ground. This is the time to stand firm in the policies that were created in the best interest of your students, your teachers, and your families.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a proposal that would strip some DEI policies from the school district's governing policies. And if you'd like to join our conversation, you're welcome to. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on Facebook, and we do have some comments from Facebook. Katie saying, these policy decisions aren't about improving education. They're about turning back progress. That's why we're holding a rally before the July 1st Duval County School Board meeting, and we're calling on our community to show up 5:30 at 1701 Prudential Drive. We cannot sit by silently while DEI policies are being wiped off the books and the board prepares to form committees to handle an onslaught of book bans. Also, a message from Tiffany on Facebook. I am deeply disappointed in a few of our school board members. Some have continued to take equity out of its intended context and frame a narrative that disrespects our community, our entire community. An email from Paul. The people who want to do away with DEI now never wanted to move towards equality and diversity in the first place. This is just a convenient time for them to retreat. I'd like to ask you about that, Warren Jones, because while you were school board chair and you served on the school board for a number of years, I think it's fair to say that the profile of the school board has changed a lot in the last handful of years. Can you sort of describe that evolution and why you think this current school board seems to be moving towards or away from policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
That's a very good question. The key, I think, is that Project 2025 clearly lays out an effort to dismantle public education. I think the road to freedom for so many people, those who are disenfranchised, those on the margins, has always been a free public education. When you can defund, reduce, or create charter schools and private school funding, then you can control the curriculum. And that curriculum may not include history of what has really gone on in America. It may be that slavery had benefits and what those benefits were. I mean, so you can control that. So if you can move students out of traditional public education that's free and open to anyone, then that allows you to control that curriculum and reduce the kind of outrage you saw during George Floyd with black and white and all kind of folks out protesting. That I think that struck a chord in some of those who want to turn back the clock on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they say, well, how could they be so enraged about what happened? Well, it's education. So how can we take that back? And I think overall, the school board and Moms for Liberty have been very effective in taking control of the DCPS school board. When I was elected in 2016, it was about what's good for students. And every board member that I served with at that time, we had our disagreements, don't get me wrong, but we were concerned with what was best for students. 2018 comes along and you have a governor and the Moms for Liberty now who wants to control every school board in the state of Florida. And you've seen board members attack Liz Anderson, the first one. She supported the mask mandate.
She's a former school board chair, Elizabeth Anderson.
Yeah,
right.
And we had, people forget, school opened in August of 2020. In the first month, the first 2 weeks of school, the state health department required that we close 2 schools because 40% of those students had contracted COVID virus. Dr. Green said, we got to do something. We got to save our students and we got to save our teachers. So we imposed a mask mandate. Out of the 12 counties who did that, 8 of those superintendents are now gone. And they made a concerted effort to remove people who did not follow the dictates from Tallahassee. And now you have a school board who signs that pledge that they will support initiatives and that agenda from Tallahassee. And that's what we have now. That's what we are fighting against today.
We have a kind of a comment from Susan on Facebook. She's saying there is value in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Eliminating equity will probably hurt our children with disabilities more than any other group. And I want to ask you about that, Yasmina, because we often think of diversity initiatives dealing with, race or ethnicity or perhaps gender or gender identity. But there are groups that fall under the I guess protections or the considerations of DEI that are disabled or perhaps veterans, people that kind of are have um, their own set of challenges that DEI aims to kind of focus on and address. So, what do you think people should be thinking about in the broader context when the board is having these conversations about changing these policies?
They need to be thinking about that it is not just about race. They need to be thinking about it has to do with gender, it has to do with LGBTQ, it has to do with our Hispanic population, our ESOL population, which is the English speaking only language students. It isn't just about race. When you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, you're talking about everyone. You're talking about everyone that does not look like what our board looks like right now. You're talking about students of all nationalities, all ethnicities, all makeups in our school district. And I want people to know and realize that and understand that. And to be able to understand that, they need to get involved, they need to get engaged, whether that be with our SAC, PTA, getting a group of parents to come together, because these people are going to be the heart and soul of the success of our public schools and the success of our school district.
To your point, though, I wonder how will eliminating DEI impact the Individuals with Disability Education Act. I mean, we have students who are disabled, and we have to educate those students no matter what degree of disability they have. And we have two schools, Alden Road and Palm Avenue, who work with students, and those students can stay in the school system for today's age of 22. So we have to be concerned about the impact that would have on our students, to your point, with disabilities.
Some of the policies that are under consideration for removal here, I mean, I think we should just cite some. One of them is a goal that is currently in policy that, the school board, the school district aims to, quote, prohibit and correct intentional discrimination in any district program. Another says the goal is to balance curriculum to accurately reflect our demographics, and that the school district is committed to ensuring that equity and inclusion are essential principles of our school system. So those are all things that are up for discussion at this coming workshop and at the school board voting meeting on July 1st. So, that's something that they're considering. But I know that some of the school board members have said, well, we like some of those things. I think particularly Miss Bolduck, Melody Bolduck, has said that she doesn't want to get rid of everything wholesale, but there are certain things that she does not like, and she described those as things that try to engineer outcomes. And so, she was saying that if we're focused on things that try to affect an outcome, that would be problematic for her. So one thing I think that was pointed out was something that would ensure, that matters are handled in an equitable and respectful manner, ensuring something happens as opposed to sort of indicating that it's a priority. Do you see a distinction there that's important?
So she mentioned that she didn't want it to be engineered, board member Bolduc. And while I respect her position, but it not being engineered is how we got segregation, is how we got Black kids going to one set of schools and white kids going to another. Diversity, equity, inclusion policies are in place for a reason. They are in place to allow that equitable education, to allow that inclusivity. So I don't know how else we can capture diversity, equity, and inclusion without being intentional that that is what we're going to do in the school district. And I want to add that all of our staff, including down to the janitor and district staff, should look like the makeup of our school district. When I was in Duval County Public Schools, I had 1 to 2 Black teachers. I should have never gone 12 years without seeing someone who looked like me. Those experiences where students can connect to people who look like them is important. And for board member Bolduc to say that she doesn't care what race someone is, well, of course you don't care. You have people that look like you. I don't.
And one of the themes that we've learned in the school district is that you can't be what you can't see. And so for students to be able to see a teacher of that color, of their color, helps them say, well, I can do that. To see growing up in Jacksonville, up until 67, there were no black elected officials. Uh, Here I am, graduated in 69, and 10 years later, I'm on the city council. So I saw Sally Mathis and I saw Mary Singleton, Earl Johnson, and others on the city council. So, I can do this. So I think that's very important that you're able to see people who look like you, so you can aspire to be what they are. Uh, to do away with DEI, I think is a mistake. I think it's something that the state and federal government is trying to bully districts to do nationwide, and we're still in the deep south, and we have those issues, and they're not going to go away overnight.
Janie, I want to ask you, we partly because we got a note on Facebook about it saying that the board at this recent workshop spent, quote, an embarrassing amount of time trying to find another word for equity. And it's true, that was sort of a sticking point saying, well, we kind of agree with these ideas, but we have to avoid that word. We know that that's kind of a word that is going to attract attention, that's, one of those words in DEI that must be avoided. Can you just sort of address what is happening when the language itself is the problem and maybe not the concept?
Yeah, this is what happens when the wrong side steals the narrative, because there is such a negative connotation around DEI and what it means. And because people don't know what it means and they think that it's this negative thing, we have these outcomes. And unfortunately, DEI is what we need, especially right now. It literally translates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is about creating pathways. Yasmina and Warren made excellent points. When we say diversity, equity, and inclusion, we mean making sure that when we have a diverse group of students, that we are intentional about making sure that we are hiring faculty and staff who represent that diverse body, right? That's not excluding others, but that's being mindful of the decisions you make. Making sure that if you have students who are falling through the gaps, who are having issues, that you're being mindful of the different identities that those students have so that you can be intentional about providing the supports that those students need. We can't have a one size fits all approach to all of our students, because if we do that, then you will have students who fail because we fail to recognize what issues they're having either at home or in school. And so when we are in a place where we are now, where you have where people are having problems with the term or the word, I find that most of us do have similar values. It's just that the disconnect happens with the language. And if that's a problem, then I go into spaces now and I try to use the most simple language that folks can understand so that we can connect around values. You want to support our kids, right? You want to make sure all of our students are successful, right? Well, if you want that, this is what needs to happen. We need to be creating spaces where those students, all students, can come into a classroom and feel safe and feel seen. Otherwise, we will have large amounts of students failing because we are not creating supports with them in mind.
So, Warren, there is a meeting this Wednesday called an agenda committee meeting, which evidently does allow public comment so people could speak to the board on this issue if they care to. And then there's the July 1st board meeting where a vote of some kind is expected on this policy change. Do you, as a former school board member, feel that those comments that the public could bring forward are meaningful, that they could sway this school board one way or another at this point, given kind of their already sort of known positions on some of these topics?
For those known positions, no. For people uh, who are keeping an open mind, which I think is very few of the majority of the board, uh, it's not going to make that big a difference. I think raising some issues, public comment is always important to me because I try to make sure that I have an open mind and that I listen and understand different perspectives. Uh, you can't do that if you already made up your mind. And the workshop, I think, is where you make the biggest impact, because once they've come out of workshop and made a decision, once they get to July 1st meeting, you're not going to be able to sway it too much. They've
Mhm.
already locked in those positions.
Yasmina, do you plan to be at those meetings? And what is it that you want to say?
I plan to reiterate that diversity, equity, inclusion is important. We need bold school board members who want to do the right thing for all children. We don't need comfortability right now. We need courage. And I want to encourage anyone who is able to attend the policy agenda meeting on Wednesday to show up, and anyone who can attend the July 1st board meeting. We need more parents and more people involved, taxpayers, stakeholders, whoever, to get involved in public education. And the only way to know how that works is to listen to these meetings when they're recorded live, show up in person, and use your voice. That is the most powerful thing right now, is to use your voice. And the only thing that is more powerful than money is people power. And we need people to show up and share their concerns. And whether we can sway them differently, or they change a word that could mean the same thing, even though I like the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's still a win, because we are still incorporating that need for justice for all of our children.
Well, Yasmina White, Warren Jones, Janie Joseph Ruiz, thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, celebrating the Black architects who helped build and rebuild Jacksonville. Welcome back. An upcoming panel discussion explores the footprint of Jacksonville's Black architects and the challenges of uncovering that history. Here to tell us about it is Mitch Heeman, archivist at the Ritz Theater and Museum. Good morning, Mitch.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, Jacksonville overall, I feel like, is guilty of perhaps not being aware overall of just some of its great architects. And that includes names that I think people who follow such things know well: Broward and Hardwick and Clutho. But in terms of Black architects, those in particular are names that we don't often know as well. Can you kind of explain why that is? How a little bit of the history of this place and the history of, the realities of Jim Crow impacted the work of Black architects, and then also their standing legacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I find that when I've been living here 10 years, I've been working in historic preservation the whole time, essentially. But I'm from way up north. It was a culture shock for me, and I found in my work here, often when the question comes up about Black history and its role, the default answer is sort of like, a reaction is, well, there probably isn't much, or if any at all. And the truth is, in most cases, architecture is one of them, that's not the case. It's really everywhere. And Jacksonville, to me, it starts with bricks. I usually talk to people about this, and I bring up. So I'm not an architectural historian. I am very interested in it, and I know my colleagues in town are doing a lot of this amazing work. But I always look at things in more unconventional ways, storytelling sort of ways. And I talk to people about bricks basically, because what I learned in my research here was it's a thread that follows through this legacy of black contributions to the building of the city originally, and then rebuilding it over and over again. We have a tendency to burn down in this town, so there's a lot of interesting history about rebuilding, and African Americans are at the center of that the whole way. So early on, during the plantation system, we've got the strawberry plantation in Arlington, in the Arlington area. There was the Red Bank plantation on the south side. These in particular had brickyards in addition to other things on the estates or on the premises. And John Sammis himself, who ran the plantation, the strawberry plantation, when he was finally selling that property around the Civil War era, one of the things that he would talk about was, he had this brickyard, and he would brag that the majority of the bricks that were in Jacksonville that built Jacksonville were created by the enslaved who lived on that plantation in his brickyards. And you fast forward later to the Great Fire, and you start to zoom into some of these photos of the rebuilding efforts, and you see a lot of black faces. You see a lot of African Americans sifting through bricks, rebuilding. They were a part of it the whole way through. But what's interesting, what happens during the Reconstruction era is it was a really somewhat progressive time, and then you started to see individuals who weren't even from here, some from Georgia and other places, who were builders, contractors, designers, African Americans, who came in, and there was opportunity then to do that. You've got people like R.L. Brown and S.A. Brookins, Richard Lewis Brown. He even served 2 terms in the House of Representatives at that time. So there was a lot of opportunity then, but there was still sort of this legacy of a lack of representation, and not acknowledging. It was more of an informal training essentially,
Mhm.
and these they weren't basically at the table, if you will.
I mean,
Um,
some of that has to do with the fact that, schools or certification programs really weren't open to Black people. And in some cases, someone who wanted to work as a contractor or professional architect couldn't even pull permits, that they couldn't necessarily go as a Black person to City Hall and get, the building permits that they needed. Some had to actually rely on white contractors or white developers to pull those permits for them.
Absolutely, yeah. So some of them, S.A. Brookins, for example, Sanford Augustus Brookins, who did actually build several structures in Riverside. Um, a lot of the ways of getting around that, as you say, is that they had to have partnerships with white developers and others who could help in terms of, like you said, pulling the permits, going to City Hall, the ability to have that sort of access. I mean, even walking into City Hall, this access wasn't available in those days, and so they had to do all these sorts of workarounds. But what's interesting is that because of those workarounds, a lot of times the Black architect or designer or builder isn't really acknowledged because their name is suddenly nowhere to be found on any documents. For me, I remember I was involved in doing a lot of research for Mount Olive AME Church out on the east side, which R.L. Brown had designed early on when he finally started working as an architect. And, we were trying to come up with a designation and recognize its history for its centennial. And I was astounded and so thrilled to see his name on all of these documents. When I worked with the city and finding the blueprints, R.L. Brown on every single page. And it was just so thrilling to see because you don't see that very often.
And R.L. Brown, I mean, in addition to building the Mount Olive the AME Church, which is on the east side, is also credited with building Centennial Hall at Edward Waters University. Did a number of pieces of work for the Duval County School Board after the Great Fire. He was actually born into slavery. I mean, so the fact that he has emerged as probably Jacksonville's most well known architect and builder, Black architect and builder, is really kind of an astonishing trajectory.
It absolutely is. Yeah, you're right. He was from Abbeville, South Carolina, born into slavery, and that trajectory of just from those origins to coming to Jacksonville, and as I said, serving in the House of Representatives. He like many others, he wore a lot of hats. He was a contractor. He did a lot of different types of work, and then eventually was working for the school system. And that's really kind of where he took off there, because he was sort of the man who was involved in building schools, fixing schools, all things schools. So he certainly was credited as designing several of them. And as you say, Centennial Hall up at Edward Waters University. And but early on, again, he wasn't acknowledged or recognized as the architect, even though, in many cases, sometimes I do wonder, a lot of times when there's no designer or anybody listed, or it's an unknown sort of situation in this town, I wonder if it was one of these individuals who was behind that. Because I've even talked with people over the years from Riverside who are like, we don't know who built my house, but it looks like an R.L. Brown house. They actually feel like, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but they start to notice certain architectural traits of his, and they start to wonder, well, maybe this is why we don't know who built our house.
And Joseph Blodgett is a name a lot of people will know very often because of Blodgett Homes, but he also built hundreds of homes, including Abraham Lincoln Lewis's home, the first Black millionaire in Florida. And he's sometimes known as the Black Henry Clutho, just because of his incredible output and also distinctive style.
Yeah, absolutely. He was, and that's something that a lot of people, people are starting to talk about that. He lost a lot of homes in the Great Fire as well.
And in Sugar Hill, because so much of
Yes.
that community was destroyed.
Absolutely. So he was, so we tend to think, of course, Henry Clutho is sort of a household name here, the man who came, rebuilt the city, and he's behind a lot of the real iconic structures in building White Jacksonville. But there were other neighborhoods and communities that were also in need at that time in rebuilding, and Blodgett was hit his finger on the pulse in that regard. And over 200 homes, most of them he owned and rented them out. And I think that's part of why he became such a successful businessman and is believed to be the first Black millionaire of Jacksonville.
And so this is the subject of the second of Riverside Avondale Preservation's Porchlight series. They're going to be talking about the legacy and impact of Black architects, kind of a particular focus on Riverside and Avondale, but obviously so much to explore there. I know that you, Mitch, are going to be part of that panel, and that event is the 19th of June, Thursday.
Yes.
All right.
Yep, Juneteenth.
At Happy Medium Book Cafe. Mitch Heeman, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Up next, 7 nights of free concerts at the annual St. Augustine Music Festival kicks off with a musical celebration of Juneteenth, which is also this week. I had a chance to sit down with the event's co-founders. We'll hear that conversation just after the break.
Jack's Chamber, with 3,000 members in Northeast Florida, is dedicated to driving economic growth and ensuring everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Membership offers business leaders opportunities to connect with each other and with the community. More at jackschamber.com.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
Join WJCT Public Media for a special screening of Flow, a visually stunning PG-rated film The Hollywood Reporter calls a joy to experience. Flow is presented by Film at WJCT Studios, Saturday, June 28th at 2 p.m. Doors open at 1:30. Enjoy the film with popcorn, a cash bar, and the company of fellow film lovers. Visit wjct.org/events for tickets.
President Trump's decision to send National Guard to Los Angeles is now up in the air, with a federal appeals court reviewing the case. A lower court has already said Trump acted illegally. For our weekly politics series, If You Can Keep It, how presidents can deploy U.S. troops domestically. There are strong norms against using active duty military for law enforcement. Why? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it was created to fill a cultural need in St. Augustine, and now, nearly 2 decades later, it has become a cultural institution in the city. Here to tell us about this year's St. Augustine Music Festival are co-founders Jorge Pena and Jin Kim Pena. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. Jorge, you play viola. Jin, you play cello. You've both performed with the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra. Jorge, you've performed with the National Symphony Orchestra. You're both very skilled musicians. What was it? Why was it important for you to kind of create this outlet closer to home?
Well, it's a question that has many different answers actually. For us as immigrants, we came to the United States, and this gave us an opportunity to give back. Also gave the opportunity to many of our colleagues to perform during the summer time when there's usually not much. That was back then. Now things have changed a lot. As a matter of fact, when we went to the cathedral, there was not much. Actually, there was nothing going on in the cathedral.
This is the Cathedral Basilica where you hold the St. Augustine Music Festival.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the Cathedral Basilica has become such a great place to perform that is almost impossible to get any space there. Meaning that the whole adventure turned out to be very successful. Here we are almost 20 years later, and we have been able to produce some of the greatest chamber music, chamber orchestra, a lot of different soloists, international soloists, and we continue to bring this free to the public.
Yeah, this is 7 days of concerts, all of them free, Jen. I know that the first one we're kind of kicking off with a celebration of Juneteenth with the Ritz Chamber Players. What are some of the highlights that you're particularly looking forward to this year?
This year, actually, very excited about our first concert. Bringing Piazzolla's Four Seasons, and it'll be performed by Nigel Armstrong, which we are very fortunate to have him for almost 10 years, I think. Time flies.
Yeah.
And then we have Maria Valdez coming to sing, and she's an amazing singer, and we're very fortunate to have her on our third concert. So, and we, I love all the concerts, and then our last concert is very special because we commissioned Pure Subject for the 450th anniversary of St. Augustine, and he composed for us, called St. Augustine Suites. That's our last concert, so that's very special.
That's the St. Augustine Suite, as you say, was kind of written for the celebration of St. Augustine's birthday.
That's right. And as a fact, I want to see that piece become kind of like the soundtrack of St. Augustine. It's such a fun piece. It really feels like a movie soundtrack. Has different movements, and each movement depicts different aspects of history. In St. Augustine, for example, the first movement, it sounds and evokes sounds of primitive life of the Timucuan Indians. It moves to a different movement. For example, it has the Castillo San Marco, which it showcases some of the history that has gone through, the wars and the conflicts that have been fought in that fort, and you hear it in there, almost like like a real movie soundtrack. It has sounds of longing, depicting the ocean waves and that travel that came from Spain and eventually brought these people to St. Augustine to settle it. So it's a fantastic piece, and like Jim was saying, every single night is a different program, and it's very unique. We of course, we are in charge of curating each program and each one individually. If you ask me which one is my favorite, I couldn't tell you because each one is brings different things. The Juneteenth concert is another one that is gonna be very unique. Obviously, we are celebrating many different things, but the 125th anniversary of the of writing of the "Lift Every Voice," which becomes the national anthem for the Black community, and we're gonna have many different. The whole program is all Black African American composers, and we also have two great singers. We have a lot of different type of sounds. It's like a lot of when we think about uh, a lot of the African American coming to the United States, they brought with them that culture and that flavor. This is showcased in this music and in a setting that is in a classical setting in a way. So it's very unique. I think that that's going to be a great concert to attend as well.
Well, there are, it's free, but if you do want premier seating, you can get those like secure seating at SAM Festival, samfestival.org. I know it's going to be a great series of music. Jorge Pena, Jin Pena, thank you so much for being here this morning. We
Thank you
really
for having us.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having us.
All right. And thank you for listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Please join us tomorrow. We're talking to a doctor who just returned from performing surgeries in Ukraine. We're going to get some information from him about the lay of the land and what he saw there. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. AARP Florida. During hurricane season, AARP Florida offers resources for older adults and their loved ones. Floridians can find the tips and tools they need to prepare, respond, and recover. AARPFlorida.org/FL Disaster Help.